Walalan Gwe, Nindaluvis Galahoj, daughter of White Buffalo Cattlemen. So I always like to speak in my language to acknowledge my ancestors and my family. So my name is Star Child Eliza Knockwood, and I'm from Ebigwitk, and I am of the Bear and Thunderbird clans. So it's a true honor to be back with the family of ACIC, and I see some familiar faces here and some new ones. So I'm really looking forward to these next 2 days with all of you. We have a great lineup of panels here. We have 2 of our panelists on the screen here. We have one we're present in our presence. So this is on climate environment. It's so important in peace. We have Ashley Kopaj, and she is a mother. She and her is the mother, educator, and student from Sibonacadic First Nation in Nova Scotia. She holds a Bachelor of Science and Applied Human Nutrition from MSVU and a graduate diploma in curriculum development from CBU. She is in her final year of Master's of Education in creativity, sustainability, and innovation at CBU. Most recently, Ashley has worked for the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, Clean Foundation, and the Nova Scotia Department of Education. Ashley's work focuses on the intersections of food, education, and environment. Wow, that's power. Dr. Aldaf Abro is joining us virtually and is the head of mission for Secours Islamic France, SIF. He has more than 20 years of professional work experience at the national and international levels, with 10 years of it in a senior management with responsibilities to lead the program departments in the development and execution of strategic program plans. He was previously associated with Oxfam, Plan Canada, International Development and Relief Foundation, and Worldwide Fund. He holds a PhD in public development planning from the Asian Institute of Technology. He has represented organizations at the national and international fora and coordination with key stakeholders and donors. We also have Dr. Leela M. Harris, who's also joining us virtually. She's a professor at the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability, IRES, and the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice, GRSJ, at the University of British Columbia. She also serves as co-director for UBC program on water governance, is a member of the Sustainability Perspectives, and is an associate of the Department of Geography and the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies at UBC. Harris's work examines social, cultural, political, economic, institutional, and equity dimensions for environmental and resource issues. Her current research focuses on the intersections of environmental issues and inequality, social difference, water governance shifts, example, marketization, participatory governance, in addition to conducting a multi-sited analysis of the non-material dimensions of water insecurity, highlighting themes such as emotions, trust, senses of belonging, and state legitimacy. Examples: South Africa, Brazil, and Canada. So without any further ado, let's engage this beautiful panel. We are so honored and privileged to have you joining us. So truly grateful. Thank you for your time. So I'd like to start, I feel, with a question that I'm going to have you all answer. And we'll start with Ashley, who could start responding to this question. And so every one of our panelists here brings us a diverse perspective. And I think we're going to have a lot of great learning in this moment with them. So I would like to start by asking our panelists, from your perspectives, what is the relationship between environment and building and sustaining peace in communities? So Ashley, if you don't mind, we could start.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Lala and Eliza, it's nice to see everybody in person. It's been a long time of Zoom presentations, so I'm really excited to be here. So this morning when Jennifer was talking about internal and external peace, I thought about my answer to this question, and then I thought about it some more. And so I was thinking of a Mi'kmaq way of life called Nadugalum. And Mi'kmaq people always have, and even today we live by Nadugalum. So it's a way of life that calls for thoughtful consideration for how your actions or inactions will impact everything in the environment. And Nadugalum begins when you begin to weave, there's the 4R core values. So respect, relationship, responsibility, and reciprocity into all aspects of your life. And so I brought a quote from Carrie Prosper from Buttingag First Nation near Antigonish, and he is a Nadugalum practitioner. And so he says it's a complex cultural concept that encompasses Mi'kmaq sovereign law and guides individual and collective beliefs and behaviors in resource protection, procurement, and management to ensure and honor sustainability and prosperity for the ancestor, present, and future generations. And so Nadugalum can look many ways because it's integrated into everything you do in life. It's not like a mental concept. It really is that way of life. But in like a harvesting or like a hunting context, it can look like if you're hunting a deer or a moose, you're only taking, you're taking one bull moose. You're using everything that you take, you're sharing it with your family and your community. You're not wasting anything. And anything that you're not using, you're returning that to the environment. So that's like a really practical way you can see Nadugalum in action. And so Albert Marshall, Elder Dr. Albert Marshall, he talks about Nadugalum as the root of it is empathy. And if you build respectful, reciprocal relationships with all living and non-living things within your environment based on empathy, including empathy for yourself, that internal piece, and empathy for other humans and the environment, I think you'll inherently be making better decisions for the environment, and you'll be doing so in a way that doesn't spur conflict between people and nations.
Dr. Althoff, do you want to take it next? Do you need me to repeat the question? We can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Oh, I was talking to myself. No, what I was saying, I mean, it's always good to be, part of the learned group of people as you are. But I really thank you for inviting me to this conference, to the symposium. I would like to give answer to this very pertinent question in a different way. The example that I would like to bring is from my work. So the question that you asked, from my perspective, what is the relationship between environment and the building and sustaining peace in communities? And I would say there is a strong relationship between environment and peace building and sustaining peace. The example that I would like to give is from the natural resources, and obviously environment and natural resources, it's like they go hand in hand. There is a close relationship between the two. Then I'm living in Pakistan at the moment, and if you know that Pakistan is a water-stressed country, at places the average rainfall that we get in countries about 110 millimeter, 120 millimeter, which is very, very small, and most of the communities live off a very small quantity of water. and really making difficult for people to, to survive in certain places, especially talking about third desert, where the rainfall is very minimum, hardly 110, even less than 110 millimeter per year. So given the water stress Pakistan endures, it is difficult for the sectors like agriculture, industry, urbanization, environment, and even the water for nature to get the, equitable quantities and the quantities that they really require. It is equally difficult for the government to provide the provinces with a due share of water. So the conflict among the provinces erupt from time to time, and that cause high level of tension and distrust among the provinces. With increased population of about 220 million in Pakistan, urbanization is happening at a rate. And I can give an example from one of the cities, which is the biggest city in Pakistan, is Karachi. The total population is about 22 million. The water requirements for Karachi is about 1.2 billion gallons per day. Now you can imagine, like, people with that population, 22 million, and the requirement and the demand of 1.2 billion gallons per day, they are hardly getting like 500 million gallons per day, which is not even half of the demand that we have in Karachi. So the availability of water for Karachites is only like 500 million, which is half. This means the availability of water for people is less than half of their needs. So there is no issue for rich, because rich people, they can really afford water. They can buy water, they can purchase water. But the issue is for the poor people who are low income. They cannot afford, and they don't have any easy access. So, but poor suffer the most. In these circumstances, what happens is the water thieves or the tanker mafia, they are really thriving. So there are about like 10,000 tankers alone in Karachi, and those are owned by the Karachi Water Supply Board, and also some of them are private. So what happens is most of the people, they will get the water through the tankers, but they have to pay cost for that, and it's very, very expensive. One bowser or a tanker of 1,000 gallons would cost about 20 to 30 US dollars, and if you are converting into Pakistani rupees as the local currency, that comes around like 5,000 to 7,000 rupees just for 1,000 gallons of water. Given the population, which is about 21% of people are below poverty line, it is extremely difficult for people to afford. And the other 20 to 30% of people are, barely, above the poverty line. So you can imagine how it is really impacting the fabric of society, because the crime rate is also going very up. People cannot afford, cannot purchase water. So what is happening is, like, if you look at the reports on a daily basis, there are like 7 to 8 different, cases per day. People are being mugged, people are being looted, the cash and the cell phones and other properties are being snatched. So it is really, eroding the fabric of society. Water is absolutely critical, and it underpins economic activities and agriculture production. It is a basic human right in terms of water consumption. Since a big number of people do not have easy access to water, and neither they can afford, it is difficult for the government also to provide people with such quantity of water. So for building and sustaining peace in communities and societies, it is important to conserve environment and make equitable use of natural resources like water. So from my perspective, I would really conclude by saying that there is a strong link between the two, the environment and the peace building and sustaining peace. Thank you.
Well, Alan, wow, puts things into perspective. Dr. Harris.
Thank you. So I'm Layla Harris, and I'm joining you from the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam lands, and what's now sometimes referred to as British Columbia, pictured behind me. So I would like to just mention a couple things, just I hope that are consistent with the other panelists in terms of what they've emphasized. So again, I come with the belief that there's a fundamental linkage between environmental conditions and peace, and also just the equity dimension is what I wanted to focus on, which was implicit in the other comments and also explicit in some of what we just heard. But what I look at is how environmental injustice is key to what enables stability and also well-being. And it's tied to what we were just hearing about, the social fabric. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples from the research that we've done. There's a couple of obvious linkages, I think, where we can, of course, have outright conflict when we have water stress or conditions, uneven access to resources. When people are struggling with their daily needs, they're less able to invest in other key societal needs, education, and so forth. It's a resource drain. But I'll give you a couple other examples that relate more to just feelings of inequality and exclusion and how that affects us as individuals and also societally. So just a few examples. In work that we've done in South Africa, we've been able to show, both with narratives and also some quantitative follow-up work, that the conditions of water and sanitation are fundamentally tied to people's trust in the government. And this is intuitive at some level. So here, the legitimacy of the post-apartheid New Democratic South Africa, in some senses, is tied to the very stability and also equity in terms of service access. And what's sort of interesting in what we found here is that it's not just basic services. People don't just need water and sanitation to live and survive, even though we know that that's true. People are really focused on whether or not those services are equitable. And that's where significant stress and also mistrust of institutions and governance comes into play when people observe and experience those inequities as they do in South Africa and many other, all contexts pretty much, on an ongoing basis. Another example I'll just mention is work on sanitation that was led by Margaret Morales, here, one of our students in Buenos Aires. And this was communities that didn't have access to sanitation. And the key thing she found is that even though people from an engineering perspective suggested dry toilets and other options that might be suitable in these communities because of the water level and other conditions around topography, people really wanted flush toilets because they said that's what other people enjoy. Isn't that what you have in Canada? They said to our Margaret as she was doing the work. And so here, just to pay attention to the way inequity is experienced and felt and how that affects people's sense of what's appropriate and just. So in those communities, she found that equity was really the key issue. It wasn't appropriateness of sanitation in terms of the biophysical conditions that really mattered for people, but they wanted similar access to services that they felt like other people in neighboring communities of Buenos Aires also enjoyed. And the last example I'll cite, which I hope is consistent with these themes, is we just published a recent paper that was looking at questions around trust. And I work mostly in water, a lot on drinking water, but also water insecurity more broadly. And when people talk about trust in water, they're often trying to convince communities that they should trust the drinking water. So it's often people saying we need to show the community that the water is safe and therefore they don't need to rely on bottled water or some other source, that they can trust the municipal source. But in this paper, we've kind of used different examples to think through not trust, but actually trustworthiness. So we're trying to shift the focus, not in terms of do communities trust or not, but looking at the trustworthiness of institutions over time and how that gets built. So in a colonial context, you can imagine that whether or not people trust the water source is linked in a much larger fashion to the longue durée of colonial relations, how communities are affected by other decision-making practices or other things that have been done. In the context of Flint, Michigan, here again, people's own understandings of the water system were diminished by experts. And so now it's not a simple question of trying to convince the community to trust the water source as it's often conveyed, but rather to pay attention to that longer relationship and how the institutions can become more trustworthy over time, especially given the history and the experience of failure in those communities. So in all these ways, we can see different examples about stability and what you would consider fundamental for peace, democratic institutions, trust, legitimacy of government, but also just equitable social relations are really key dimensions that I think are mediated through environmental injustice as a key factor. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Wow, well, Alan, that is, that really hits the personal inherent role for us Innu here, the Mi'kmaq, especially this territory and across Turtle Island. Water is life. We're raised to understand water as such. Water is life. Water is sacred. Water is alive. And we have this very beautiful prayer we say when we have our water walkers and when we're using our water, which is water, we love you. Water, we thank you. Water, we respect you. Those are very simple but potent words that we speak to our water. And we learn from childhood, from a very young age, how to be water walkers, how to carry our water. And we are taught from a very young age that as women are water protectors. We carry life in our womb. For 9 months, we are the carriers of water. We're the carriers of life. Water is life. And when we're birthed into this world, we are brought in with this water. We're brought into this world with this water. So we protect it, we honor it, we cherish it, and we're also taught by our elders that water never lies. Water is a record keeper. Water tells us truth and only truth. And growing up, I wondered, I was so curious, what does this mean? Like a record keeper, tells us the truth. Let's think for a moment the water table that supplies Jabukduk, Halifax with our water. I visited that water. It's a beautiful area, but it's all fenced in. There's camera surveillances surrounding your watershed here. And it's surveillance 24/7, 365 days out of the year. No one can get within like feet of that body of water. It's that protected here for Jabukduk. Now I go to my own watershed in Ebigwit. I can walk right up to it. I can put anything in it that I want. But then that water has a journey. That water, that body of water takes a journey to your tap. What is that journey? What does that look like? What is existing around that body of water? That water will tell you the truth. It will tell you if we're healthy or if we're unhealthy. But by the time it makes it to your tap and into your cup and into your vessel, it's went through an extreme process. So it's been depleted of so much. And so many additives have been put into it. And we think of Nugalamuk, right? That Ashley shared about only taking what we want, what we need. And then we're hearing about these figures of dollars being put onto our water. My grandmother always said, someday you're going to have to buy your water. And to my mother, that was, yeah, right, Mom. She was telling, that's not even going to happen. Like, how can that happen? Everybody has water. Everybody needs water. But now we are putting this dollar sign on our water. And so this really hits a soft spot for me. And it's a really important part because we can think right now in our mind about a body of water that is important and special to us, that we may like to visit or take our families to or walk along, to get that peace and that, that feeling of joy with the water. We could think of that body of water right now. What is it telling you? What is the water speaking to you? What do you know about that water right now in your life that's close to you, that means something to you? So reflect on that, take note of that. And I think it's important for us to take some action. Seek out those watershed coordinators, seek out those protectors, and understand that we have a responsibility, societal responsibility, a collective responsibility to those bodies of water and what we're doing with that water and that journey it's taking to us. Our grandmother had shared with us, the late Josephine Madeoin had shared with us before she had passed, that we have this soul relationship with the water that connects us all. So all the bodies of water are connected. So when we put our prayers in the Atlantic, it will eventually make its way through to the Pacific. It will make its way around the world. And that, putting that into perspective for myself when journeying with her and learning with her, is understanding that what we do to one will affect the whole. And I feel right now we have an international perspective on the water with our panelists. And this is really important for us to keep in mind moving forward on the rest of our discussion today and throughout this time together. So I could go on about water for too long, so I'm going to continue on. But I thought I'd shine a bit of that that knowledge and share that with you from our Indigenous perspective. And I also want to give a shout out to our elders like Albert Marshall and his late wife that's left such a huge imprint on our education system. I'm very proud to know them as well, Ashley, and thank you for echoing that. So actually, Ashley, I would like to share another question with you. So in our current economic systems, elements of nature and our environment are seen as resources which can be exploited, which we're kind of touching on together now, and owned and controlled. That's Shabuktuk's water right now. It's owned and controlled. Indigenous and local knowledge around the world has been raising the alarm on poor environmental management and on the breakdown in a relationship to the natural environment. So from your experience at the intersections of education, environment, and food, could you speak to us about the need for environment and climate solutions for peace building and the need to look at Indigenous knowledge as the way forward? Thinking you guys all have your own mics. No, they're on.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll talk about Nadugalim quickly again, which when authentically lived or practiced creates space for peaceful interactions to happen with everybody that you interact with through those 4 R values. And with Nadugalim, you're not looking at the environment and its resources through an extractive lens. You're looking at it in a holistic way in which you treat everything with respect, and you understand that you have a responsibility to protect it. And Elder Joe this morning talked about Nsitnogama a little bit, but that's something else that we say, which means all my relations, and lots of Indigenous nations around the globe have a very similar saying that really means it's a way to signify like the deep and interconnected relationships that you have with everything in the environment. And that responsibility you have to treat it with respect. So like the water, the animals, the plants, you're treating that the same way and with the same love and care that you would treat your sister, your mom, your brother, your child, because it's all our kin and we come from this earth, everything that we need in life comes from it. And one day we'll return to it. So, it's really the least we can do to, treat it with respect and care for the environment. And one of the really great things about Mi'kmaq knowledge is that it is fluid, it has flux, it has elasticity, and it's evolving with our changing world, while still holding those core values that really instill responsibility to care for the environment. And so that means that we can integrate green technologies and advances in environmental science that can really have a positive impact for everybody. And that kind of leads me back to Dr. Albert Marshall and his late wife Merdina's work with Etowoptimum, or two-eyed seeing, it's also known as. And so that was a guiding principle that was reintroduced by that really lovely couple. And it really just means, learning to see with one of your eyes the strengths of one knowledge set. So maybe Western environmental science, and then with your other eye, the strengths of Mi'kmaq knowledge or another Indigenous knowledge set. And then bringing those 2 knowledge sets together kind of to benefit everybody. And so I really think that Etowoptimum is our collective path forward towards peace and environmental sustainability. Our nation's coming together towards shared goals for our planet, using the best ways of knowing to improve conditions for everybody. And if we use Etowoptimum in the environmental sector, with the new GLIMP at the core of all decision-making processes, that really is the path towards sustainable peace in our communities.
Well, Ellen, two-eyed seeing, when that came out, it's taken hold. It's taking hold straight across our beautiful land, eh? It really is. I'm seeing it integrated in so many programs and on so many levels. But thank you for sharing that with us. It's so important. Even these panels, us coming together is a prime example of this, right? The symposium these past 2 days is two-eyed seeing. Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Althoff, I have a question for you here. We have all been hearing the news about Pakistan's recent floods. And can you shed some light on how this has amplified security risks and vulnerability in the region? Pakistan is also considered a vulnerable country on the climate risk index. To elevate the country out of this risk, what are the steps different stakeholders need to be taking, like the grassroots government, nonprofits, civil society, and specifically international community? Are you able to, just shine some light on those security risks?
Thanks, Eliza. Thank you for the question and thank you for giving me the floor. You have rightly pointed out, Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries when it comes to climate change. And in fact, if we look at the International Climate Change Report, it stands at 6 out of 10, most vulnerable countries. This flood that happened very recently is one of the proofs, is the evidence, how vulnerable we are. And if you compare these floods with the 2010, like the super floods that we have in 2010, this had the higher magnitude. Although the loss of life was not as much as it was in 2010, but given the losses to property, losses to livestock, and the loss of houses and damages to other properties and houses, it was tremendous. It was huge. So the damages that are estimated to be in billions, it's not only millions, but it's billions, is about 40 billions. And still the water is standing. We have not been able to estimate the actual losses to the damages to the property and rest of the infrastructure. So if we follow the trend, what we'll see the frequency of floods has increased. In recent times, first it was in 2010, again in 2012, and again now in 2022. Previously, floods used to happen with the space of 30 to 40 years, but now the frequency has really increased. In past, like 1 decade, we got 3-4 times of floods. So why these floods are happening? So what is the cause behind that? The reason behind that is the climate change, I would say. And climate is warming up, causing the heat waves, erratic rainfall, and change in precipitation and the rainfall patterns. The average rainfall, as I was, giving the figure in my previous answer to your first question, is about 120 millimeters per annum, which is too low. But this monsoon season, it was 3 to 4 times than the average, and at certain places more than 5 to 6 times of the average. So which means in 1 week, in 5 or 6 days, there were cloud bursts and all sorts of issues that we've been facing here in Pakistan. So the average ranges from 600 to 700 millimeter. The water infrastructure is poor, and the system has no capacity to hold water. Dams, rivers, and lakes overflowed that inundated vast swaths of the land. Now, how this has caused an issue? About 33 million of people across 4 provinces have been impacted, and 1/3 of the country was submerged or flooded. and 2 million houses in 72 districts were damaged, causing mass migration of people. People are sitting by the roadside, and some of them have migrated to adjacent districts and even to some other provinces. And they are not ready to go back, and they cannot go back to the place of origin because in some of the district water is still standing. The outbreak of disease such as malaria, cholera, hepatitis A, typhoid caused by the stagnant water, and yellow fever caused by dengue virus are ravaging the country. Young children and women are suffering the most. Winter is upon us, and it will further aggravate the situation, as one can really imagine. So poverty is on rise, I would say. Not only poverty, but the crime is also on rise. People are vulnerable and are desperate and can easily be exploited by the criminal elements. On the other hand, there are anti-state elements who can take advantage of the situation and recruit vulnerable youth and use them in terrorist activities and destabilize the region. So I'm trying to make a connection to the second part of your question, how this is linked to the insecurity in the region. So this is a big security risk, I would say, in the region. You know a little bit about history about India and Pakistan. We are neighbors, and we have already fought 3 wars in the past 60, 70 years. Although not directly related to natural resources like water, but water is a fundamental element. The continued occupation of Kashmir by India is not mainly because of the pricey real estate or subjugation of Kashmiri people, but it is to some extent due to Kashmir's strategic location. Kashmir is a water gate to Pakistan. Most of the water from India enters through Kashmir, except a couple of rivers that we have, Kabul River and the Swat River. So India can stop this water whenever it wants. So what I'm seeing is, like, in the future, there could be a war between the two, which I hope not. But if there is a war, that is going to be happening on water and the natural resources. Just to give you a little bit of a background, in 1960, the World Bank brokered the Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan. That facilitated the division of 6 rivers, because there were 6 rivers. So what happened is the 3 eastern rivers were given to India and 3 western rivers were given to Pakistan. That include Indus River, Jhelum River, and Chenab River that were given to Pakistan. On western rivers, the sole right to use of water is with Pakistan. But what is happening is India is illegally constructing dams, and they have already constructed dams. So Krishan Ganga Dam has been constructed on the Indus River, and Baglihar Dam has been constructed on the Chenab River. So it is a gross violation of the Indus Treaty. Now, India is knowingly doing this because they know that Pakistan is a water-short country, is a water-stressed country, and they can stop water anytime they want. So India discharges water when there is excess water in the upper reaches and holds water when there is a water scarcity downstream Pakistan. So with water shortages as they are now, Pakistan is feared to be declared water scarce country in just 2 years, because one of the reports that I was reading, so there is going to be, like, formal declaration of Pakistan to be a water scarce country in year 2025. So this might escalate the tension between the 2 nuclear armed neighbors, putting 1.5 billion people of the subcontinent in danger. So this is how I see how drought or floods can amplify the security risk and vulnerability in the region. Now, the second part of your question, what the other stakeholders can really do, and what steps a grassroots can take. So I would say, like, one of the panelists also mentioned the indigenous knowledge, and I think our generations, we are really forgetting about the indigenous knowledge. So I think it's the time that we get back to the indigenous knowledge, we preserve the knowledge, and also pass on to the youth and the younger generation. Now, the other thing that the grassroots can do is also to shift to sustainable consumption pattern and reduce the organic food waste, conserve environment, and practice 4 Rs. So now, what are these 4 Rs? I would say these are refuse, reduce, reuse, and recycle. If the grassroots are really adapting to these 4 Rs, then I think to a certain extent we'll be doing some favor to the planet. And as far as the governments are concerned, what governments can do, governments have the resources, and most of the governments have the resources. They should really make better policies, not only policies that are really sitting on the table and nobody is using them as a document, but the policies that really answer the ground realities. They can also invest and incentivize conservation of natural resources. And think sustainability first. I mean, that is the message to the government, that they should really think sustainability and also build DRR components in all the public projects. Invest in early warning system. And I think this was also one of the messages of the UN Secretary General when he visited Pakistan. He was also emphasizing that, he would lobby around, he would do the advocacy with the richer governments to help Pakistan to install the early warning system, because it would require a lot of investment. The other, step that governments can really take to eliminate corruption and red tape and stop unnecessary bureaucratization of processes to complement things and deliver for the good of people. Now, the other stakeholder, which is obviously a very prominent, is the civil society and non-profits. What civil society and non-profits can do, they can create awareness among the masses, make communities resilient by building their capacities, by introducing some training programs and all that. So to create the awareness and also build the community's capacities. Civil society can also help in the preparation and adaptation, prepare communities so that they can adapt to the change. For the international community, what international community can do, from the environment and climatic justice perspective, wealthy countries should bear the loss because the environmental mess is done by the high income and heavily industrialized countries. So I would say US, Canada, Germany, France, other European countries who have the monies, who have the resources, and they are at the level where they have achieved all the level of development. They should really bear the burden of this environment rather than the poor countries like Pakistan. Now, talking about the other regional countries, including Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, do not have the resources to clean up this environmental mess. And I think the advanced countries should really come forward and they should pay for the mess that they have made. What international community can do, they can do some advocacy with their perspective, with their respective governments to uphold the Paris Agreement on climate change. So precisely asking their governments in the home countries to precisely cut emissions and finance the required adjustments. And also what they can do is to forgive the loans of developing countries, or at least relax the terms and conditions. So the other thing that can be done is the international donor community should come forward to help poor developing countries like Pakistan. So I would like to mention that there was a UN appeal launched in the month of September. The government of Pakistan was requesting about 160 million, which is a small, tiny amount as compared to the losses that have been estimated, which is about 40 billion. So even the 160 million didn't come through. Now, what happened is after 1 month, the government revised the appeal to 816 million. So far we have only got like 100 million US dollars, which is almost nothing to the if you compare the losses that we have in Pakistan. So I think international community should really come forward to help the poor countries to build their economies, help their people to put the livelihoods together and fend for themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wow, I've definitely received some education on this today. I'm so grateful for this insight here and this knowledge, Doctor. Dr. Harris, I have a question for you. We are curious about your research. Like I've really been having fun looking up all of you, the three of you, and learning more and more of what you're doing. It's so important. So we're curious about your research on the intersections of environment and inequality, water access, and government issues. And could you elaborate more on the research and what have been some findings?
Great, thank you. So I did mention a couple elements of the research. That was the work on trust, state legitimacy, for instance, and also sort of senses of inequity. So one of the key ways that I try to explain what we're looking at sometimes, and this is what we mean by non-material dimensions, is we know that water, for instance, is important for public health. We know that it's important for bodily health and well-being, but how else does it affect us as social beings and as communities? And so here I'm looking at those like intangible things around senses of injustice and how that affects us. The broader histories, in terms of how that comes to bear in something like water resources. So it's not just a question of do people get a certain number of liters per day, but how it gets wrapped up in lots of other questions around meaning and politics and identity. So those are the things we try to uncover. But if you don't mind, I just wanted to return to some of the things that Eliza and Ashley already mentioned and just sort of reiterate them, because I think what's so interesting, and this relates to the two I'd seen as well. I've been working on water for 30 years or so, water insecurity, water politics, and different questions. And some of the most powerful insights and things where I feel like the priority now for us to be rethinking our water governance are precisely around the issues that were raised in terms of empathy, respect, and sort of renewing our relationship to water. So at that very fundamental level, like we can cater institutions so that they can be a little more inclusive. We can do more science to better understand how climate change is going to be so devastating for different communities. We know all that though enough, and tweaking at the numbers or getting a sense of the degree of the loss, I don't think is as meaningful as sort of shifting those very fundamental questions about our relationship and understanding of water. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that and say that, especially since I've moved to Canada, which is now 12 years, I've learned so much from Indigenous scholars and elders and communities around these questions, but also there's some really interesting resonances with other knowledge communities. So feminists have been writing very similar things about ethics of care, ethics of mutuality, and also how, I'll give you one example from a piece that I love. This is by Astrida Naminas, who just joined UBCO a year or two ago. But what this piece is about is really understanding that how much we're affected by everything around us. So there's no such thing as certain people doing well, us doing well when other people are not doing well. And so that's exactly the insights that I know from my research about vulnerable communities. We're all affected when vulnerable communities are not able to deal with a catastrophic flood or poor water conditions that lead to illness. COVID was a clear example of that in terms of our interdependence and mutuality. In the same way, I see a lot of examples in the water realm, and what Astrida writes about, which I think has just really interesting resonance with the other ideas and understandings we get from Indigenous thought, is that, our bodies are porous. Water moves through us. We're not separate. It's not an impermeable thing. The condition of our waterways directly affects the health of our bodies. Our health and the health of the species that also rely on the same water bodies are all mutually imbricated and interconnected. So again, I think it's exactly what we've been hearing with slightly different language from Indigenous communities and even from Eliza and Ashley, as they emphasized just a few minutes ago. But how does that understanding fundamentally shift how we think about water and our relationship to it? And one of the key implications that I see, just because of the work that I do, is it no longer becomes a question of how do we treat water to make it meet this drinkable standard from a chemical perspective. It's about how do we care for the waterways and maintain the health of those ecosystems more broadly. So not only is it going to be safe when we drink it at the tap, but it's going to be safe for all the beings that rely on it. And in fact, we're doing things that, with PFAS and other organic pollutants and persistent chemicals in the environment where we're not treating them out of our water systems. And those are flowing through our bodies and we don't know what effects it's having. We don't even have the tools and knowledge from the scientific perspective to know what they are, to name them, to understand their long-term effects on our ecosystems and on our health. So to me, it's sort of going back to the sort of, we shouldn't be polluting those waterways to begin with, because it's not just a simple question of, oh, we'll treat them and take them out of the system. And especially if we move towards water as living, the implications are even much broader, because then the typical treatment processes that we tend to rely on are not appropriate, given that broader context and understanding. So I think there's lots of ways in which, and I'm always interested to see how many things that the science community gets to now, where it's like, yeah, that's actually what we've been hearing with slightly different language, more of a language of love and respect and care, but it's actually the same thing that we now understand from an ecosystem or health perspective around microbes in the environment and how we need them to survive and be healthy. So I just wanted to sort of end on that point if I could. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all so much for your insight on this really, really important, life matter here. This is, let's be real here, life and death situation when it comes to our water and our Mother Earth and our fellow sisters and brothers and all the life that we share this planet with. We are in this position. I want to ask that each of you sitting here in this space and on the interweb, put down right now on a sheet of paper next to you a piece of homework for your water. So then when you leave here today, even if it means, I just never thought of where my water comes from, go look this up. Nova Scotia is doing great in giving us those resources of our watersheds. That information is out there. And if anything you could take and learn about your own drinking water right now and get involved with your local watersheds and get educated on what our amazing panelists have shared with us today. Further that knowledge, go further with it, take it. And like our brothers and sisters in Pakistan, their situation as well, it echoes with Indigenous realities here in our own country as well and abroad. So there's relationships there that should be bridged, and we should really work together, and we should really carry one another forward when it comes to our water. And please challenge yourself to learn about your local watersheds, learn about your local water, and go bigger and write those letters and create those bridges. And let's advocate for a healthier Mother Earth and water, because to have a healthy water system, to have a healthy planet, is to have a healthy us. And it all comes from the core. So I want to thank you all again for your time, for your work. Unbelievable. Like, this is happening. It's brings me a lot of hope. And I will continue to keep an eye on all your work and follow you. And I hope everyone here at the symposium does the same. So please keep us up to date and let us know how we as a broader community can help you all in your work as well, because I'm definitely dedicated to you all. So please, everyone.
There is a question from Sana in the chat box.
Oh, we have some. Oh,
doing
yeah.
a
We
Q&A?
have online stuff. Do
Yeah.
I give this to someone? We do have time.
Thank you. So there's a question from Sana Masood. She asks, what are some of the most effective ways of keeping gender, particularly women, at the center of water advocacy and policy as a key stakeholder in water management?
Was that for all the panelists? Okay. We can start with you, maybe, Ashley.
Yeah, so keeping women involved in water advocacy, I think my mind goes to our grandmothers in our communities. They're our water protectors, and I think it's important to center their voices, and they know what's going on. They know what's up. They're the experts, and so listening to them, making sure they're at the table when those conversations are happening from the start.
I'm going to chime in if I can. and say that just echoing that, I think it's also a question of broadening our understanding of expertise. One of the key things that's kept communities and women from making key decisions around water has often been that we have particular notions of expertise, where women might not feel welcome to share, or if they do share, they're not listened to. So I think, having an appreciation for the diverse perspectives and understandings people bring is a key thing at a fundamental level that can shift those practices.
If I can also come in, this is a very important question that Sana has asked. What I can say is, women, they are handling water, they are fetching water, they are using water, they are, using water in cooking and all that. So first we have to acknowledge the role that women are playing in the water, management. So that is the first thing. Now, the other thing is, given the low literacy rate in Pakistan and other developing countries, I think we need to increase the literacy so that women can, raise wise girls, and also making sure that, women have access to productive resources. So what happens is, even if there is a small kind of a kettle or a goat at the household level, that is tendered by women, but it is not the property of women. It's the men, who makes the decision at what time, the livestock is small as such, even, couple of chickens, needs to be sold in the market. So here we need to, kind of make a kind of a level ground for women where they have access to the productive resources. Now, the third thing that I would say is to engage them actively and also make sure that they are in the leadership role. If they are in the leadership role, they would be able to, raise concerns and, look after the needs that they have. Otherwise, if we look at the projects that we are doing, in most of the cases, we look at the proportions, how many women participated, against men. So we try to make up the ratios like 50% women and 50% men. This is not the realistic change that we are going to bring. In order to bring in the realistic change, we need to bring, women actively and engage them. Looking at the proportion, 50% women, 50% men. So women are there, but they are just the numbers. So the number doesn't do us any favor. The only thing is we need to increase their involvement, engagement, and the leadership. Thank you.
Wow. And I just want to just take a moment to say how important it is for our brothers, our men, to stand with us, women, and that your words resonate with me and they give me strength. And I will take that with me. And that's really important, to have our men standing as our protectors of life. And that's inherent knowledge. We're the protectors of water, and our men are our protectors too. So it's that equality that we're seeking. And so I want to take a moment to respect our men that's standing with us. So Walali Oak.